There's something unsettling about traveling at night. The stillness, the emptiness, the feeling that you're not entirely alone. But what if that feeling was right? What if the people around you weren't really there? Tonight, we begin a chilling story, The Last Ferry to Nowhere, Ghosts of the English Channel. A journey meant to connect two shores, but instead, it connects the living and the dead. It was a cold, wind-beaten night when the MV Elysian Dawn prepared to make her final crossing from Dover to Calais. The terminal was nearly deserted, except for a handful of passengers waiting in silence, their faces pale in the dim yellow lights. The air smelled of salt and rust, and the sea beyond the docks churned under a thick shroud of fog. Among the passengers was Rowan Hale, a 29-year-old photographer from Bristol. He was on his way to France for a photo project about coastal ruins, the kind of forgotten places where history clings like mist. He carried only a small camera bag and a flask of coffee. As he stepped onto the ferry, a strange shiver ran down his spine. The deck was eerily quiet. Inside the cabin, Rowan noticed a few others. A woman with silver hair sat near the window, knitting a scarf that never seemed to grow longer. A young man in a brown leather coat stared blankly at an old newspaper dated October 12, 1974. An elderly couple murmured softly to each other, their clothes strangely formal, as if they had come straight from another century. The ferry horn bellowed once, a long, hollow sound that seemed to echo from somewhere far older than the steel vessel itself. Rowan glanced at his phone. No signal. The time read 11:47 p.m. He took a seat near the middle of the cabin, trying to ignore the chill crawling up his arms. The engine rumbled, the ferry pulled away from the dock, and the fog swallowed everything behind them. The world outside vanished. No stars, no moon, no shore. Just a pale, endless gray. Rowan tried to start a conversation with a woman sitting across from him. She introduced herself as Alara Quinn, a journalist returning from an assignment in Dover. Her voice was calm but distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. "Strange night for a crossing," she said softly. "They say fog like this can trick your mind." Rowan smiled weakly. "Or maybe it hides things better left unseen." A man in a captain's uniform appeared near the stairwell. Tall, lean, his face drawn and colorless. His name tag read Captain Aldrich Morrow. He gave a brief nod to the passengers, then disappeared toward the bridge without saying a word. Something about him felt out of sync, as though his steps didn't quite match the rhythm of the ship. An hour passed. The passengers barely spoke. The air grew colder. Rowan's breath began to mist in front of him, though there was no draft. When he looked out the window, he could see faint lights flickering in the fog, moving lights, like lanterns drifting just beyond the ferry. Alara noticed them too. "There shouldn't be another vessel that close," she whispered. Suddenly, the lights vanished. The ship gave a deep groan, and for a moment, Rowan thought he heard voices beneath the sound, distant cries, echoing from the water itself. He stood and moved toward the window. The glass was fogged over from the inside. He wiped it with his sleeve and froze. There, outside in the mist, were faces. Dozens of pale faces pressing against the glass, mouths open, eyes wide, as if gasping for air. Their features were blurred, like reflections in moving water. Rowan stumbled back. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Alara didn't answer. When he turned to her, she was staring straight ahead, her eyes wide, lips trembling. The young man with the newspaper was gone. The seat was empty, but the newspaper still lay there, damp and faded as if it had been underwater for years. A sound came from the deck above, heavy boots, echoing steps pacing back and forth. Then, faintly, a voice over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We are now crossing the ghost line. Passengers, please remain seated." The lights flickered. The engine slowed. And then, for the first time, Rowan realized something terrifying. The ferry wasn't moving forward anymore. It was drifting backward, toward the darkness it came from. The hum of the ferry's engines faded until there was nothing, only the whisper of waves brushing against the hull. The cabin lights dimmed to a dull amber, flickering every few seconds as if struggling to stay alive. Rowan's heart pounded in his chest. Alara stood up slowly, her eyes darting around the room. "Something's wrong," she said under her breath. "We're not moving forward." They both looked toward the window again. The fog had thickened, curling and shifting like living smoke. The sea outside was eerily still. No waves, no sound, no reflection. It was as if the ferry had drifted into a place where time didn't move. Then, a low creaking echoed through the walls. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the corridor outside the cabin. Rowan turned his head sharply. "Did you hear that?" Before Alara could answer, the door to the corridor opened. The same elderly couple who'd been whispering earlier walked in. But now, they looked different, drenched, their clothes dripping seawater, their faces pale and sunken. The man's hat clung wetly to his head, and the woman's scarf floated around her like a ghostly veil. Are you all right?" Rowan stammered. The woman smiled faintly, her lips trembling. "We never made it across," she said softly. "The storm came too soon." "What storm?" Alara asked. The old man raised his head. His eyes were clouded gray. "The one that sank us in 1974. Before they could react, both figures began to fade, their bodies dissolving into mist until only the dripping puddles on the floor remained. Rowan backed away, his hands shaking. "This can't be real. This can't be real." He rushed to the stairwell, with Alara close behind him. They climbed to the upper deck, desperate to find someone, anyone, from the crew. But as soon as they reached the open air, they froze. The fog outside wasn't just thick, it was alive. It moved in slow, swirling patterns, forming vague silhouettes that seemed to watch them. And then they saw the deck crew. At least 10 men stood near the railing, facing the sea. Their uniforms were tattered, soaked, their skin gray and cracked like driftwood. None of them moved. None of them breathed. Their eyes were hollow, but faintly glowing with a cold, bluish light. One of the sailors turned his head toward Rowan. His mouth opened, and a low, gurgling voice escaped. "Passengers are not meant to see us." Alara grabbed Rowan's arm. "We need to find the captain. Now." They hurried toward the bridge. The door creaked open with a shrill metallic sound, and a chilling gust of wind swept through. Inside, the control room was dimly lit, and at the wheel stood Captain Aldrich Moreau. His posture was stiff, his eyes fixed ahead into the white abyss of fog. "Captain," Rowan called out, "something's happening to your crew, to everyone. What's going on?" The captain didn't turn immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost detached. "You shouldn't have boarded tonight." Alara frowned. "What are you talking about?" Captain Moreau's hand gripped the wheel tighter. "Every year, on this night, the ferry repeats its final voyage. The night we sank. Those aboard are trapped in the crossing, reliving the moment forever." Rowan felt his chest tighten. "You're saying this ship is dead?" The captain finally turned to face them. His face was pale as ash, and water streamed down from his hair onto his uniform. "We all are," he said quietly. "We belong to the deep. But sometimes, the living wander onto our path, and once they do, the sea keeps them." Alara stepped back. "You mean we can't get off?" Moreau's expression didn't change. "The ferry sails the ghost line until dawn. If you survive the night, you might return. But most don't." Before Rowan could respond, the entire ship lurched violently. The fog outside turned a deep, stormy gray, and thunder rolled across the sky. The deck tilted, sending them crashing to the floor. The radio crackled to life with a shrill static. Through it, a voice, distant, distorted, whispered, "Mayday, Elysian dawn, sinking fast, coordinates." And then silence. Rowan looked at the captain. "That was you, wasn't it? From the night you died." The captain said nothing. He looked out into the fog again, his voice almost a whisper. "The sea remembers. The lights flickered once more, and then went completely out. Darkness swallowed the bridge. From somewhere below deck came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, dozens of them, climbing the stairs toward them. Alara grabbed Rowan's arm, her voice trembling. "They're coming." Rowan reached for his flashlight and switched it on. The beam trembled across the wall, revealing wet handprints smeared along the door. Then a whisper, soft, almost pleading, brushed against his ear. "You shouldn't have taken the last ferry." Darkness gripped the ferry like a clenched fist. The hum of the engines was gone. The only sound was the echo of slow, wet footsteps moving closer. Rowan held the flashlight tight, its trembling beam slicing through the pitch black. Alara's breathing was quick, shallow, the kind of fear that freezes the body before the mind even understands why. The footsteps stopped just beyond the bridge door. Silence. Then 3 knocks. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. Rowan whispered, "Who's there?" A low voice replied, muffled by the metal, "Passengers boarding." The door burst open. A rush of icy air swept through, carrying with it the smell of seawater and decay. Figures poured in, soaked, shivering, their faces pale and featureless in the dim light. Their clothes were torn, seaweed tangled in their hair. They moved without sound, drifting rather than walking. Alara screamed and swung the flashlight beam across their faces, but the light passed right through them. They were shadows of the drowned. "Run!" Rowan shouted. They bolted from the bridge and stumbled down the corridor, the ship groaning under their feet. Every step echoed like thunder in the hollow halls. The ferry felt endless now, stretching and twisting as if it were alive. Doors that should have led to cabins opened instead into pitch-black voids filled with whispering voices. Rowan caught sight of something ahead, an emergency exit sign flickering faintly in the dark. "There!" he shouted, grabbing Alara's hand. They burst through the door onto the outer deck. The storm had arrived, rain slashing sideways, waves crashing over the railings. The fog had lifted just enough to reveal the impossible. Another ferry was sailing beside them, identical in shape, rusted and broken, half-sunken. Its name, barely visible through the rain, was Elysian Dawn. Rowan's eyes widened. That's this ship." Alara stared, horrified. "We're seeing the wreck, the original ferry." As they watched, ghostly figures on the other vessel screamed silently, clutching the rails as waves tore them apart. Lightning illuminated their faces, and Rowan realized with horror that some of them looked just like the passengers from their ferry. It wasn't another ship. It was a reflection, a memory repeating itself through time. Behind them, the door slammed open again. Captain Morrow stood there, his uniform torn, eyes glowing faintly blue. "You have to jump," he said, his voice hollow. "Before dawn, before the sea takes you." Alara shook her head. "Jump? Into that? We'll drown." The captain's gaze softened. "It's the only way to return. The ferry cannot carry the living past the ghost line." Rowan hesitated. "Why are you helping us?" A faint smile crossed the captain's face. "Because once, I was alive too." The deck beneath them began to tilt. The sound of cracking metal echoed through the fog. The ship was sinking. "Go!" the captain shouted, his voice breaking through the storm. "Now!" Rowan grabbed Alara's hand, and together they ran toward the railing. The waves below crashed violently, glowing faintly with an eerie bluish light, the ghostly remnants of the drowned crew reaching up like hands. They climbed the railing. Alara looked back one last time. Captain Morrow stood in the doorway, saluting as the deck around him began to crumble. Then, without another word, they jumped. The freezing water swallowed them whole. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no light, no breath, just silence. Then, a burst of light. Rowan gasped awake on the beach. His clothes were drenched, his throat burning with salt water. The sky above was pale and gray, morning. Waves lapped gently against the shore. Beside him, Alara lay motionless, then coughed and drew in a shaky breath. She opened her eyes. "We made it." Rowan looked out to sea. The fog had lifted. There was no sign of the ferry, no wreck, no sound, nothing. Only the endless calm of the English Channel. He stood up weakly, his body trembling. "It's gone," he whispered. Alara pointed towards something half buried in the sand nearby. A piece of rusted metal, its surface barely legible under layers of barnacle and salt. In faded letters, it read, "Elysian Dawn, lost October 12th, 1974. Rowan's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Alara. "That's the date on the newspaper that man was reading." She nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "We crossed their path. The same night, the same sea." They stood there in silence as the morning sun rose over the horizon, painting the water gold. For a brief moment, Rowan thought he saw something far out in the distance. The faint outline of a ferry moving silently through the mist, vanishing as the light touched it. Alara whispered, "Do you think they're still sailing?" Rowan looked out toward the horizon, his voice low. "I think they always will be." And that was the last ferry to nowhere. A haunting reminder that not every journey ends where it should, and some travelers never make it home. If you felt the chill of the English Channel tonight, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more terrifying tales, and share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've ever experienced something that can't be explained. And remember, next time you travel across the sea at night, listen closely, because the ferry to nowhere might still be waiting.